Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ed Evarts, and I am the lucky gal who gets to be Ed's wife. I want to welcome you tonight to the virtual book launch of Drive Your Career. Here it is. Sorry, wrong side. Here it is. We have a lot of exciting items for you tonight. Caroline, Sarah, and I are extremely proud of Ed. Drive Your Career is his second book, and he's already begun scribbling notes for a third. Since the first week of dating back in 1986, I was aware that writing a mystery was at the top of Ed's bucket list. We all know that reading and old movies are two of Ed's passions. Actually, tucked away in his office is a well-worn notebook of his storyline ideas. Now, I realize that Drive Your Career is not the great American novel Ed was envisioning back in '86, but goals morph. Now, in 2018, a light bulb went off that he wanted to share all the frequently asked questions he has encountered during his coaching career. And with Drive Your Career, he has achieved that goal. Publishing this book to help others has given him great joy. Now, Ed still has plenty of time to ask Stephen King to write an acknowledgement for his 400-page mystery novel. Okay, we're gonna go here, but speaking of plenty of time, we all want to wish Ed a early milestone happy birthday. Now, you can all do the math and figure out which one this is, but yes, coming up on November 10th is a big, big birthday. Now, I'd like to introduce our daughters, Sarah and Caroline, who have some technical updates for you. So let's just enjoy the book launch. And again, thank you all. This means so much that you came and joined us here tonight. Thank you. Was that slow enough, Ed?
Perfect.
Okay, just checking.
Hi, everyone. I am Ed's eldest daughter, Sarah.
And I'm Ed's youngest daughter, Caroline.
We are here tonight just to basically do some tech support. So just a couple of things we wanted to run through and let you know. First of all, if you have not seen it yet, on the corner of your screen, this is being recorded. So we just want to let you know that is happening. Second thing is that this is a webinar view situation. So you will be able to see and hear the six of us that you can see on the screen, but we will not be able to see or hear you for various organizational purposes and to avoid 40 different dogs barking in the back of this. So that being said, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A button on the top of your screen, should be or bottom depending on how your Zoom set up, but it is Q&A that's separate from the chat function. So if you have any questions, please use that. We do strongly recommend you ask questions during this, make it a little bit more interactive. So go ahead and use that Q&A function to reach out. I think that is it. We will be posting a link for the book towards the end of this so that it doesn't get lost in the chat and Q&A functions. So we posted it earlier. We'll post it again at the end of the night. And yeah, that's it. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce Karen Burke, one of Ed's colleagues, to take it from here.
Sarah.
Thanks, Karen.
So Ed and I met each other in coaching school, and we've been great friends and colleagues ever since. And along with my husband, Mark, we're really celebrating this victory for Ed, which is really a family victory. Kathy's been there every step of the way as well. When Ed asked me to join the panelists tonight, I was just to be part of his team of co-hosts. Writing one book is, well, that's one thing. Writing two books is just darn right fantastic. So Ed, we're all celebrating with you. So there's a clap going around. I hear it in the chat box, and I think I speak for all of your fans, really, when we're really celebrating you. But we're also saying bravo and thank you. In your latest book, and if you haven't got it, you can get it on Amazon. In your latest book, you've really crystallized for us in a very, very succinct way the powerful ways we can be at work to actually be at the helm and driving our career. We got to meet a cast of characters. So from Kyle, who's a marketing associate, who's learning that bringing curiosity to his leadership style can greatly enhance the value he adds to his team, to Busayo, who is in a tech company and learning that, feedback is necessary to be effective as a leader. We were engaged with the story, but also the beauty is we see ourselves in the book. And that means we have confidence to take action, to drive our own careers. So I echo the sentiments in the chat, which is happy 29th birthday to Ed. And with that, what we'd love to do is turn it over to you, Alain Hunkins. You're going to say a little bit more about the book before Ed and I start talking a little bit more about the book.
Sure. Thanks so much, Karen. So hi, everyone. My name is Alain Hunkins, and I have the good honor of being a friend and colleague of Ed, as well as Ed asked me if I would write the cover testimonial on the book. Now, I had my own book come out earlier this year, and one thing I know from both sides of the process of being a reader and a writer is it's really hard to write about something that you don't know well. At least you can't write about it very well because you don't know it well. And so I want to tell you about a story about an experience with Ed that is something that I experienced with him in real time that I think is very much reflected in the book. So I had the good fortune to be a guest on Ed's podcast, which is called Be Brave at Work. If you haven't checked it out, please do. And what I love about the theory behind it and his philosophy is Ed really believes that all of us have had to go through these moments, these tests of courage where we've had to step up into our bravery. So as we built rapport, and we did it over Zoom, and as we're getting ready to record, Ed said to me, and it's funny because I've done lots and lots of podcasts, and not a single other podcast host has ever done this before. Ed said, hey, before we get started, I just want to let you know, we're going to turn the cameras off. So that way you can go fully into this and not be distracted. And to me, not only was that super effective, because obviously, since the subject is about being brave and being authentic and being vulnerable, it was that Ed noticed in that moment a little detail matters. And so when he sent me the manuscript for the book to read through, what I noticed that came to life are all of these little details, and not just like a general thing. Like, for example, he writes the power of the pause is one of his 9 items to drive your career. But he goes into the practical, actionable pieces of what does the pause mean? How can you deal with that? And so what I noticed throughout the book is you're getting this experience that is built on the back of decades of wisdom that Ed has accrued, but yet distilled down and kind of gone through the cycle of going from a simple idea, and he's gone through the complexity of it and then come out the other side to explain it in such a simple way. So kind of who you get as the person shows up big time on the page. And I think for anyone who's really interested in furthering their development working with anybody else, whether that's personal and or professional, I mean, I can't recommend the book highly enough. So again, it is an honor. Ed, congratulations. I'm so proud of you and just so glad to be a part of this process with you and wishing you all the best on this journey. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Ella. So Ed, we're all really excited to hear a little bit more from you. And, one of the things that everybody wants to know when an author writes a book is, what was your inspiration? So we heard a little bit about, Kathy gave us a bit of a preamble, but what was your inspiration for Drive Your Career?
Well, I think my inspiration came from my 12 years as a leadership coach. My first book, Raise Your Visibility and Value, really came from my 25 years working in corporate America. And when I left corporate America, I had the blessing, at least early on, of not having a lot of clients. So I had plenty of time to write, and I would go to, back in the days when you could actually go to a restaurant, would go to Panera and sit down and write till noon until you got kicked out because they needed the tables for lunch, and worked on that book. And after that experience, realized that I think there was another story to tell, which is my experience really as a leadership coach, and this observation I had that there are certain activities and behaviors that people experience, fairly consistently, regardless of level or company, that folks needed to hear about. I didn't bring them up purposefully. It's not like I had these 9 ideas and I'm going to talk about them again and again and again. They came up naturally because these are very comparable experiences that people were having. And so to end the story, I think I had one of those taking a shower moments where I suddenly realized that these ideas could be, kind of fermented and put into a book. And hence we have Drive Your Career.
I love that. And I remember as colleagues, we would connect periodically to muse or speculate or strategize, or maybe even extrovert, as we call it, which is kind of to create an action plan, that you would say, KB, I'm in my office, right? So you were at Panera, and that's one of the things I've noticed about your coaching journey is your really commitment to learn and scale and grow, and your commitment, your value to share and help other people learn, but also embedded in that is your dedication. So it takes some commitment to get all the words down on paper.
Well, you share a quick story that I'd love to share with folks is that Sharon and I met each other at a coach training school way back in 2008, 2009. And since then, we have this behavior where we can call each other and say, hey, I need to extrovert for a moment. Let me just tell you what I'm thinking. Let me tell you why I'm thinking it. Let me tell you what I'm struggling with. And the other person just has to listen. And Karen always solves her own challenges. And I think I always solve my own challenges because we have an accountability partner or a person who we can just say, hey, I need to extrovert for 5 minutes. Do you have a few moments? Yes, go. And out it comes. So I really appreciate that. And that's been incredibly helpful for me throughout the years.
Oh, and for me as well. And I think you really underlie the coaching profession, which is really all about this way we hold our clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. So being able to bring a space for some thinking is really useful, but equally so is to have some practical strategies, and strategies born of, we get a purview, we get an inside view of what some of our clients are saying. And so that's what you've done with these 9, and I'm kind of dying to know. Do you have a favorite?
Well, this is part of the book, is this belief that people like knowing what to do next. And, as coaches, unfortunately, in our purest sense, we're not really in a position to say, oh, here's what you should do, right? It's really pulling from them, because I know, and speaking for myself, and I think this is true for you, Karen, that our clients often always have the answers, right? It's just not having the ability to think about it and really decide externally, what it is they want to do and where they need to go. And that's why I love that we can call each other and just get it out, because it helps us move forward. And so these 9 ideas, these 9 behaviors or actions, whatever you might want to call them, really came from this belief that people want some clarity around, what can I do differently to be more effective? And there are a number of areas that people can work on. In fact, the areas are really endless in respect to things that are of interest to people. But these 9 are the 9 ideas. And, I don't know that I have a favorite. I did not put them in chronological order from most important, least important. They're all important. If you read the book, if you read 2 chapters, because only 2 chapters you think apply to you, that's fantastic. Each chapter can stand independently. But I would tell you the first one really, I wrote first because it's the one that just struck me the most, which is how to have a positive relationship with your boss. And, as I tell people when I talk to them about this, I'm not a statistician. I've not done any statistical analysis on this topic, but I would tell you over the last 12 years, easily 85% of my clients believe they could have a more positive relationship with their boss. And that's a huge number, right? I was stunned by the fact that anytime I asked a client, how is your relationship with your boss? Do you think the relationship could be more productive than it is today? 85% of them said, oh, absolutely. And it's not that they weren't friendly, and it wasn't that they were trying to be best friends, but it could be more effective and productive. And as I talk about in the book, when you have a positive relationship with your boss, professionally, anything is possible, because your boss is kind of this umbrella who helps ensure that you get the attention and direction and feedback and visibility that you need. If you don't have a positive relationship with your boss, there's always this third thing in the room called anger or frustration or animosity or not listening or trying to get to my point that complicates the relationship. So, it's one of the key behaviors that I believe all business professionals should have, which is to have a positive relationship with your boss. And again, I will just stress, I'm not suggesting you become best friends and go out for, margaritas on Tuesday nights and invite each other.
Although you might.
Right?
Yeah. But the thing I'm hearing is, this idea in coaching, we talk about like what's one notch up, right? So what's that one extra thing that you can do that would improve the relationship so you have more access to information, insight, possibilities, one of the quotes that you give for having a better relationship with your boss is, the secret of successful managing is to keep the 5 guys who hate you away from the 4 guys who haven't made up their mind. I thought that was so funny and truth, right? So that's a favorite. Yeah.
It is. And, I talk a lot, even though it's becoming a little antiquated, about the water cooler. I think there's a more sophisticated name for it than a water cooler, but
The Zoom room after hours. I don't know.
the Zoom room after hours, or, the local constabulary, whatever it might be. But in reality, when people leave a meeting or leave a conversation, oftentimes there's a second event that happens where people really talk about how they experienced what they just experienced, right? They act one way at the meeting or at the conversation, and then they go and bump into you at the water cooler and say, oh my God, I just had this horrible conversation with my boss and he's driving me crazy, right? And that's the real way that you're feeling, whether it's right or not. So, I think it's important that people self-reflect on, do I have a positive relationship with my boss? And if so, what do I do to keep it going? Because it could change, right? So you want to keep it going. And if I don't, what can I do? And this is why the book talks about taking responsibility for your own success and not waiting for somebody else to do it for you. What can I do differently, even if it's hard, in order to improve that relationship?
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. Even if it's hard, how can I construct it in a way that it's one more step, just a small step? Ed, can I tell you my favorite? So
Sure.
My favorite is The Power of Pause. So it's chapter 7 and it's called Pausing is Powerful. And I just think that's one of the most powerful strategies we can have in our work lives, of course, in our personal lives as well. So what do you gain from pausing? I mean, what's your insight on why that made a chapter?
Yeah, so pausing is a sophisticated behavior that leaders need to do way more often than they do right now. And anytime I talk about pausing with a client, I get the proverbial deer in the headlights look, because they think I'm talking about stopping or slowing. And in very fast-paced environments, they don't have time to stop or slow down. They feel they need to keep ahead of the competition. And the only way to do that is to go fast, fast, fast. And what happens more often than not, and as I ask my clients, when you go fast and when you move quickly, how often, 6 months or a year down the road, do you have to stop, 2 weeks before delivering it to the client or a month before delivering it to the client? Stop because you're not where you think you should be, or things aren't going the way that they should have gone. And very, very frequently it's, all the time. All the time we've got to come in and decompress and figure it out and reinvent it so that we can ensure that we deliver it to the client. So my belief is, and my experience has been, that if you pause up front and get a little bit deeper and more reflective on what you're doing, your likelihood of diminishing those late event crises is greater. And so your likelihood of hitting your client deliverables are greater, right? Yeah. So pausing is really this ability to reflect more on what you're hearing, demonstrating what I call curiosity and listening, right? Listening really well and demonstrating curiosity, and pausing a little bit to ensure that you can actually move quicker. And I won't go into detail here, but in the book, I talk about a great example regarding pausing and the 2017 Oscar telecast, where I believe
that was a wonderful example.
Yeah, Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway could have done something a lot differently if they had paused, that would have altered the whole outcome of what transpired at that event. And if you're a movie fan, like Kathy said I am, which I am, you remember that activity that occurred.
Yeah, well, and I think that's relevant that you brought that up, because if you watch that, and I would encourage you, it's everywhere on Google, or
you can Google it.
But if you watch it, what's interesting is Warren Beatty he knew something was off, right? So I think what you're referring to in The Power of Pause is also, as a leader, right, you've identified, we know when something is off.
Right.
Can you act on that?
Right.
Can you really make a decision to say, wait a minute, I'm going to be, speaking of, your podcast, Ed, that's a great moment of bravery, isn't it? Pausing is actually an act of bravery. Would you agree?
Right. But the difference in respect to what Warren Beatty did that night was, pausing is about being purposeful and present, right? So you actually plan to pause. It's not just something that suddenly happens and you say, hey, slow down. He was more thinking, because he didn't know what the next step should be. And that's not pausing. right? So that is not pausing. He's thinking, and of course he then made a horrible decision, which he just gave it to somebody else and say, here, you deal with this. I don't know what to do with this
When you
particular.
make a mess, you clean it up.
Right, which she didn't do. And
Right.
anyway, you have to watch the video to get the full story, but I think you should watch it. And that's a great observation, Karen, because you'll get a really good sense of not pausing and what happens when you don't pause and the cleanup that has to happen afterwards, versus if he had just said, you know what, I don't think I have the right envelope, it would have gotten taken care of in a heartbeat and everything would have gone on beautifully.
Yep.
He didn't do that. And
he would have been the hero, by the way.
well, we probably wouldn't still be talking about it 3 years later.
But he gave you some great fodder for your book.
That's right.
We just want to encourage also, we have a Q&A box. So if you would like to ask Ed a question, we're keeping our eye on that and we'll have him answer that. One question from Jennifer was, what was your favorite of the 9? So we're getting a sense that all are favorite, but you highlighted that boss relationship as being really important. The other thing, Ed, I know you wanted a minute here. You've shared how many people have supported you in this process. So you wanted to take a moment to celebrate them as well.
I do. And, a number of these people are on the call tonight, so I really appreciate their contributions, but there are just a handful of folks that I want to thank. So bear with me as I do this. And I've got the notes in front of me if I'm looking at it. But first of all, a number of people, you heard from Allah Hunkins, and he wrote the cover testimonial, and he's also the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, which I read and thought was fantastic. I have a chapter on empathy. He does a much better job talking about empathy in his book. So, if you want to learn some great behaviors around being a better leader, get Cracking the Leadership Code. Also, there were a number of folks, clients, colleagues, friends, and family who wrote testimonials on the inside cover. So Tracy Burns, Joe Callahan, Bob Castellucci, Mark Conley, Bill Crooker, Harry Ebbinghausen, Bill Flynn, Alla Hunkins, Jane Curtis, Brian Madden, Dave McEwen, Tom Moran, Steve Nelson, and Jennifer Riley, who you just mentioned, all people who found time to write a testimonial for the book. And these are all either business professionals. Tom Moran also has written the book, so check him out on Amazon. These are great people who found time to do that, which I truly appreciate. I also have some support people who completely make my life more bearable than it is if I were to do it all alone. You mentioned at the start of the call, Tricia Griffin-Carty. Tricia is my audio book fantastic person who not only did the audio version of Raise Your Visibility and Value, but is also currently doing the audio version for Drive Your Career. And she does a fantastic job. The audio version will be released in December. And I think you'll enjoy that as much as you would have if you had gotten the audio version of Raise Your Visibility and Value. Dee Short. Dee is my graphic designer, and she creates everything that you see coming from Excellius Leadership Development, including the invite that hopefully you all got in the mail. I have very high standards, and I will tell you 99.9% of what Dee sends me is fantastic. And other than just some minor word edits, doesn't require any editing at all. So she's highly talented and does a fantastic job on materials that we need. And I've given her name to a number of people who are on the webinar tonight, and I hope that she has done as great a job for them as she has for me. And then lastly, Sharon Towsley. Sharon is my social media consultant based in Texas. I probably work Sharon the hardest, and she does all of my social media postings on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, my website, and she also does production for Be Brave at Work, the podcast. So the podcasts that you see promoted on the webinar, on LinkedIn, etc., come from Sharon's work. So fantastic thank you to Tricia, Dee, and Sharon. I won't bore you with my story about Raise Your Visibility and Value getting produced, but I needed to do a different production experience for Drive Your Career. And I came upon an organization based in one of my favorite countries, Canada. And these folks are at Page 2 Publishing. They're not a publisher, so they don't publish the book, but they do everything that an author needs to get stuff from their head to the book. And they did a fantastic job. So I want to thank Chris Brandt, Tasia Louise, Gabrielle Narstead, Lana Okerlund, Francis Peck, Allison Strobel, Lorraine Tour, and my new best friend in publishing, Trenna White. Page Two, they did a fantastic job. So if any of you out there want to write a book, contact Page Two to talk to them about it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And
All
just,
the aesthetics as well as your beautiful content.
yeah, the book and how it looks and how it's laid out and the editing and everything came through Page Two. So they did just a fantastic job. And then lastly, we're also producing 3 videos associated with Drive Your Career, which will be released in a couple of weeks. We're trying to stage these activities. And I want to thank Christina Skillman and Rob Zaworkin, who are working on those 2 videos. They are at Skillman Video Group, and they're doing a great job in producing those 3 videos. And then, of course, I'll end with thanking Kathy, my beautiful wife, and my 2 wonderful daughters, Caroline and Sarah, who make me proud to be a father every day and are helping us tonight on the technical support side because we have never done this before and we have no idea what we're doing. So we need their help. So Karen, thank you for allowing me to thank folks.
Absolutely. And we have some questions in the chat.
Great.
And one from Rick was, these are complex times, right? 2020 is a complex year. Boy, if you need to drive your career in a year and a guidebook for that, well, there was no guidebook. Of course, now we have something that can help us. But specifically, what are your recommendations around visibility in the COVID time since we're not physically with each other? What would you recommend as comments to Rick?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about the value of networking. So a colleague of mine, Kathy Maloney, uses the Raise Your Visibility Indicator. So it's an online tool that you can use for a class she teaches up in either Northern Massachusetts or New Hampshire, I think New Hampshire. And she called me 3 months ago to say, hey, Ed, are you going to be updating the tool for virtual learning? And I said, Kathy, this is a fantastic conversation because I have never thought about doing that. And in fact, I can't believe when I wrote the first book that I wrote it more about in-person connection and not virtual connection, right?
Right.
And there's references to virtual connection in Raise Your Visibility and Value, but not as deeply as there needed to be, because even before coronavirus, we were meeting virtually. It's not a completely new topic, but it's something that certainly many, many more people are wildly interested in. So I'm actually writing a new chapter for Raise Your Visibility and Value called Virtual Visibility and Value. You gotta love the V's. And Virtual Visibility and Value is focused on best practices and behaviors associated with the 7 visibility indicators, accelerators that allow you to be more visible within your organization and industry. So that hopefully will be produced in Q4. And we're going to call it the 2nd edition of the book because there'll be a new intro and a new chapter, really talking about some best practices around virtual visibility, which does require presence and it does require engagement, and then value. How do I maintain my value and grow my value virtually, right? Because it sounds in some ways harder, and in some ways it might be, but in other ways it's not. So I'd encourage folks to keep an eye out for that, Karen.
Well, we're looking for it. And a lot of people celebrate the end of the year or New Year's with gifts. So that sounds like a great opportunity to kind of think about how you might want to show up virtually. One of the things we probably found from this year is there'll be a whole lot more experimentation with virtual work, right? Companies have seen, hey, we can do this differently. We can, function fundamentally in a new way. So expect to see more of it. Linda Rossetti, she was curious about, she has a colleague who is actually kind of new or early in their career. So do you think that Drive Your Career is well suited for an early career participant?
Absolutely. So one of the beauties of the behaviors associated in Drive Your Career is they fit anyone at any level at any time. And again, this comes from experience. So I just want to stress that these aren't 9 things that I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to say 9 things. What could those 9 things be? Right?
While at Panera, yes.
That's right, while at Panera. So, these came from actual conversations with leaders at all levels. And so I've worked with company presidents, I've worked with supervisors and everybody in between. And, 85% of them believe that they could have a better relationship with their boss. Many of them could pause more effectively and be more curious and effective. Many of them can be more curious. So as somebody who has a shared preference for extroversion, I work for a coaching group called 3D Leadership Group based in Wellesley. And 2 or 3 years ago, we were in a trip to New York, and I'm making a much longer story short, but I left that session realizing that I needed to be the person who didn't always go first. Because anytime the teacher or workshop leader or somebody would say, "Hey, who'd like to share?" or "Who had a question?" I would jump up and
You're ready.
yeah, I was ready to go. And the problem with that is because I was ready to go, I missed all of the feedback and insights that these people had, and I could have had a better answer, and I could have had a better contribution later, and I was not doing that on my end. So, for Linda, I think, in Drive Your Career, the 9 behaviors can apply to people employed who are new, people who are employed who are not new to the company but new to their role, people who are in transition. And I would say, just coincidentally, that Raise Your Visibility and Value, even in its current version, has the 7 visibility accelerators, and those very much apply to people who are new to their organization and industry, because those are things that you need to do in order to ensure you're doing more than just networking, right? Visibility is a larger map of things that you could do to be more visible than networking, which of course is, the phrase of the 21st century.
Millennium. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things about networking, and one of the things I really like about that book is sometimes when people hear networking, it's like, whoa, there's a shoulder slump. Like, oh man, I got to go eat, stale crackers and make small talk. That sounds really painful. Of course, you're coming out with a virtual chapter, but what is something you learned from the clients who are giving you feedback now that you've had this book out for some time about raising your visibility and networking, that maybe it surprised you, or maybe it just affirmed the need for folks to be doing this?
Well, lots of people still are challenged with this idea of meeting or spending time with other people. And a large part of that reason is because the context they're thinking about it around is very narrow. So when you think about networking, you are always thinking about what I need. So I'm going to meet Karen and I'm going to talk about me and what I need. And in reality, as I tell clients all the time, I can meet with the president of a company to network, and the whole conversation is about them. What do they think about their industry? What do they think about the business climate? What do they think is going to be happening in the next 5 years? What types of areas in their business could somebody who's new to the organization spend time on, right? We could talk for an hour all about them. So this idea of meeting with other people is a great way to learn and spend time understanding from them. And so, I would encourage all people to spend time with others and learning.
Right. And you really underscored or brought a yellow highlighter to this, bringing curiosity.
Yes.
Right? It's a skill we're born with, being curious. And gosh, who doesn't love being asked questions?
Well, I had a guest on Be Brave at Work just this week who, their model was that our schooling system has killed curiosity because his kids, and when I say kids, like 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? It's, hey, why is the sky blue? And why are you so tall, Daddy? And, why do we have 2 cars, right? I mean, they're just curious because that's how they're learning. And somewhere in life, we went from curious to tellers, right? Where we now believe we have to have all the answers. And this is one of the models that exists in America, in the United States, and I'm sure it's also globally, that the higher you are in a company, the more people believe you should know everything, right? So the president of
the answers.
Yeah, the president of the company should know everything, right? They know absolutely everything about everything. And so it's hard for those leaders to demonstrate they don't know everything. And they might need to say, hey, this is a new topic for me, or hey, I haven't chatted about this with anyone before. Can you tell me more? So curiosity is a fantastic relationship enricher to help people see that A, you don't have all the answers. B, you might have the answer that we need. It doesn't have to come from me. And how can we have a deeper relationship by connecting more effectively? And one way to do that's networking. There's multiple ways, of course, when you think about driving your career and really owning the next step, which is what driving your career is about, can help you do.
Yeah, yeah. And the beauty is, as you've said, curiosity is something we come innately born with.
Yeah.
So it happens to already be a tool on your tool belt. You don't have to develop that one. Yeah.
Right. Well, you look at people like ourselves who do coaching, and I know there are a number of coaches on the webinar tonight. We're taught to be curious. We're reintroduced to the idea
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
how do you have a conversation with somebody where you don't tell them anything or suggest anything, but just through curiosity, help them come to a better answer. And it's certainly not easy. I'm not suggesting you just do it, but
Yeah.
I just have found in working with the leaders that I've worked with that, and one of the chapters is about being the most curious person in the room. And the reason for that isn't just to be curious. So the goal isn't just to ask lots of questions. It's to ensure that you have a better insight. So the more I know, Karen, about what you're thinking and why you're thinking it and where you got that idea from, the better my insight's going to be. If I don't know anything about where you're coming from, doesn't matter what I have to say, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what better
It's not
way
gonna
to
land.
understand somebody else than to be curious?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? We hear a lot about 5 whys and, you know, that type of work, but really we're asking what questions? We're opening it up. As Kyle in that chapter, being the most curious person in the room, Kyle needed some guidance, some strategies. Happily, you as his coach, but really sort of looking for ways to do that. You know, we have another really great question. I think it's quite relevant for the times and for 2020. There's a question, you know, how do you bring empathy? So empathy is chapter 9. Actually, it's all about empathy. It's the name of the chapter. How do you bring empathy when someone has a very different political view than you? So that's, you know, what we're experiencing right now. But I'm going to add a little slice of lettuce on that sandwich. That one of the things we notice as coaches is just type difference in the workplace. It can feel as, you know, explosive as politics, religion, right? Those are those things we're told are complex discussions to have. But just a type difference can make it hard to see eye to eye at work. Specifically, this was a question about bringing empathy when you have very different point of views. You might want to bring politics as a backdrop, but I know you can expand that as well.
Well, we do not want to talk about politics today, so.
I think that's fair enough. Thank you for doing that.
I'm kidding. So look,
but I think it's applicable, right? This idea of a different, very different point of view.
Well, and I'm going to put a little bit of a different spin on it because I don't think empathy is the answer to everything. So somebody could have a perspective to which you completely disagree, and that may not be the moment where you attempt to practice or demonstrate empathy. And you may say, and through curiosity, ensure you understand why they think that, where they heard it. Because oftentimes, as you ask questions and start to dig through some of the layers, you may see either errors or weaknesses or misperceptions that people may have. Now you can clarify it, and it's up to that person to agree with it or not, of course. But you know, I don't believe, and nor do I suggest that empathy is some magical answer that can even bring competing political party people together, because there just may be opinions and points of view that you don't ever agree on. So you and I, for example, may feel very differently about gun control. Let's say I think people should have guns, and let's say you don't. Certainly, I want to ensure I understand why you think that way and where you get that belief, because the reasons you believe that may be very legitimate. It's not just something you believe, but either how you were raised or something that happened in your family may have led you to believe that. And I think it's important to me as a partner in the conversation that I'm curious enough to understand, and I can show empathy that I understand that's how you feel and why you feel it. But in no way, shape, or form does that mean I also have to agree. I could still say, I understand why you feel the way that you feel. I hear where you're coming from. I completely disagree with that perspective. And I love, just as I've listened to you and had some curiosity, if you would do the same for me, right? So,
right. So what I really heard you say there, Ed, along with that curiosity, it's also not aimless empathy, meaning it's not just, you know, subsiding into your point of view. I may very much need to take a stand in that moment, right? That's a leadership moment as well. And that might lead to playing the hand you're dealt relative to, that's a chapter in your book as well, right? So empathy is a powerful tool, and that doesn't release you from having a point of view or taking action as needed.
right. And in the book, you know, my goal in talking about empathy is what we call baby steps, right? So I'm not looking to write a chapter where people can now get into a deep political debate and prevail. but it's to take baby steps. And, you know, empathy is a new behavior in organizations around the globe. You know, 5 years ago, it was hardly used as a word, and even today it's still new, right? So people typically equate empathy with weakness or, you know, kind of a really overwrought soft skill. And in reality, it's a hard skill to learn, and it's a very effective way to build better relationships. So my goal is really to just do baby steps where leaders can demonstrate more empathy for people. Just to tell you a quick story, I was working with a client and I had to cancel a meeting because I had to take a family member to the hospital. And the family member is like 88, so it wasn't dramatic, but, you know, hey, I need to cancel the meeting. I have to take this person to the hospital, whatever. We rescheduled the meeting, and it was the first time I had seen this person since that hospital event. And I walked into this person's office and we started to chat. And one of the behaviors this person was looking to develop was empathy. So we started to chat. We were there for about an hour, and about 50 minutes in, I said, hey, can I pause this just for a second? We're coming to the end of our time. You know, can I give you some feedback? And he said, absolutely, would love it. And I said, you know, I think you really, I'm going to take my coach hat off for a minute and just, you know, give you an observation, but I think you missed an empathy moment, because I think it would have been highly empathetic that when I walked into this office an hour ago, before we said anything, you said, oh, hey, Ed, before we get started, how is the person you had to take to the hospital? I mean, that would have been a fantastic empathy moment because it was important to me. He might not have even been interested in the topic, but he would have known it was important to me. So those little steps of just demonstrating empathy and showing that other people are important to you and what's going on in their life and things that are important to them, you are aware of, to me would be a huge win.
Yeah, yeah. Small steps that make a big difference. I don't know if you ever saw that old movie with Bill Murray, What About Bob, right? Baby steps. Yeah. So this is a baby step moment, right? And we can all imagine, take a moment to figure out what our baby step is. We have another question, and it's about the virtual world. So there's a lot of pent up energy for your next chapter, I'm feeling. But it's, do you think the virtual world makes networking more manageable for the introvert who might feel like an energy drain from group settings?
Well, you know, we recognize that introversion and extroversion is not a social skill. It's where you get your energy from. And so extroverts get their energy from the outside world. And so we love connecting with people because we connect and we get energy.
Right, after the wedding, let's go for coffee and talk about the wedding.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go have dinner and so forth and so on. Introverts get energy internally and need to focus on it internally. But that said, with preparation, an introvert can be highly effective at a networking event if they're focused on it and have some key deliverables that they're looking to achieve. So, you know, I've read articles, and look, operating in a virtual world is new for all of us to the degree that we all are. I mean, I'm becoming a mini Zoom expert, and I'm sure most of you on the call are. You know, it provides introverts a way to connect with others that might be a little bit less draining because they don't have to get up and go out and drive and so forth and so on. I'm not an introvert. I'm not an expert on that. I just want to pause just for a second, because one of the technological challenges we have tonight is we haven't been able to figure out how to switch from panelist view to gallery, because the gallery is where everybody is. So if anybody there has a preference for introversion and can maybe type something into the chat box as to whether or not a virtual experience is better or worse, easier or hard, you know, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Sounds like a great data collection. So everyone's on the call. There's a great group of us on the call here, and we're big fans of Ed. FOE, right? Fans of Ed. So so we're curious, how can your friends, your family, your clients, how can we support you on this journey that you're on?
Well, first of all, the amount of support that I've gotten so far is tremendous. And so I'm here today because of everybody who's on this call. I will tell you, while you all cannot see each other, everybody here is either a friend, a family member, a colleague, or a client. And so I thank all four of those groups for your support. You know, I will tell you there are a couple of things that would be equally as wonderful to do. One of them certainly is to purchase copies of Drive Your Career. And I don't say that selfishly because I'm not attempting to, you know, get nominated for Oprah's book club, but I think there are some skills and behaviors in there that will be helpful. And I really want to spread the word. And I can only spread the word if people purchase the book and share it with others. The second thing is a little bit more tactical. And, starting tomorrow, I have a personal goal. And if you're sick of hearing from me so far, you might want to do this so you'll stop hearing from me. I want to get 75 Amazon reviews. So I would love folks on the call, when they get a moment, when they finish reading the book, to go into Amazon. It just takes 5 minutes and put in a positive review of the book. That would be equally as meaningful as all of you finding the time that you found tonight to join us and to be on this call.
Nice. We do have a comment from an introvert, Mark, and saying, as an introvert, I'm a big fan of the virtual world. So that is interesting. That might
and I think there's going to be a lot of studies done, right? That, even people at the Myers-Briggs organization who are kind of the grandparents of personality preferences, they don't own it, but they've done most of the research. I'm sure are deeply looking at now this massive activity level around virtualness and the impact that it has on introversion, extroversion, but also other aspects of personality preferences. And, by the way, when we talked about, going back to our first topic on have a positive relationship with your boss, you mentioned, Karen, one of the areas that could be a conflict for you is personality preferences, that just the way you operate, how you prioritize.
innately, almost like handedness, right? Right-handed or left-handed.
Can be so different for some people, and it becomes a roadblock. And rather than work to solve it, we separate and get angry and frustrated rather than saying, hey, I think our relationship could be a lot better than it is today. I'm willing to make some changes and listen and be curious with you. If you're willing to do the same with me, are you open to doing that? I personally believe that most leaders would say yes, but personality preferences are a huge complexity in respect to relationships at work with people who want to have a more positive relationship with their boss.
Yeah, so really role modeling that. And before I ask you another question, one of the participants, Greg has said, Ed, great ask and very specific and very helpful. So I think you just role modeled how, networking can really work. A specific ask is actually helpful for other people because then they know, how can I support you? Right?
Absolutely. I happen to believe, even though when I wrote the book, Raise Your Visibility and Value, that I didn't want anyone to think I was knocking networking, because I talk about networking, but really another level of activities that are out there. I am a huge fan of networking, and I believe answers of what you're looking for in life reside in others. And so, when I left my last place of employment, Iron Mountain, and that was after 25 years in human resources, I knew hardly no one. And in fact, I love telling the story of how I went to a networking group, folks that are in transition, and there were 25 people sitting in the audience of people who were in transition. This was 2008, which was not a great year. And I knew none of them, not one.
Right.
I went home and I said to Kathy, I am in trouble. Because
it sounds like that was a light bulb moment, but
it was.
But gratitude, you turned that light bulb moment into now 2 books. It sounds like there's a third one coming. You also wanted to mention, and I just want to do a shout out. Thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast, Be Brave at Work. I think it's a marvelous project. Anything you want to tell us about what's cooking over at Be Brave at Work?
Well, I'll just mention quickly, it's been a fantastic experience. It's been something that I never anticipated as impactful as it has been for me. A number of the people who are here tonight have been guests on the podcast. So Rick Kuntz, Brian Madden, John Barufka, Karen Burke, Sarah Mann, Tracy Burns, Dave McEwen, Tom Moran, Tricia Griffin-Carty, Jason Freeman. These are all people who have been on the podcast. And the goal of the podcast, we only have 20 minutes. And the goal of the podcast is really to hear from people what their experiences are with bravery at work. I believe this is an experience that we all have at the work at some point, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in big ways, but everybody can talk about bravery in the workplace. And what's really interesting is about 5 months into the podcast, my number one concern had been finding guests going even into it. Before I even started the podcast, I'm like, I'm going to run dry. I'm going to run out of people to ask. And about 5 months in, I started getting incoming requests from people I didn't even know to be guests on the podcast. And many of these are authors, professors, people who have done research on bravery, courage, grit, resilience, these words that kind of dance around bravery. And so I love the fact that it's growing in respect to its visibility and that people want to be on the podcast to talk about bravery in the workplace. That's right. Tony's reminding me of Amy Edmondson, who was a fantastic guest.
Teaming. It was a wonderful, wonderful episode. Yes, indeed.
So Karen, I just want to thank you for being my friend and my colleague and my co-host tonight. I hope this has been a great event for everybody. I regret that I don't know how to convert the panelist view to the gallery view so everyone can see each other, but I hope this has been a fun event for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ed. And you've got some goodies that you mentioned. Participants are eligible for some prizes tonight. You're always generous. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so everybody who is here tonight will get a free digital copy of Raise Your Visibility and Value. So the book Raise Your Visibility and Value is in hardback, paperback, digital, and audio. So we've got all the media covered, and we're working we're working to do the same with Drive Your Career, but we will ensure that everybody gets a digital version of Raise Your Visibility and Value. And even though the added chapter is not there, which will also ensure everybody gets when it's published, it has a lot of information in the book that I think can be extremely valuable to folks, whether you're in transition, new to a job or new to a role, or at an organization for a number of years. There's always time, and this is why you and I get hired often, Karen, is because people need to be reflective and build their self-awareness on how they're impacting others in the workplace, even if they've been there 10, 15 years, because something's happening that requires them to have to do that. So
yeah, some seismic shift, right? Like what happened this year, all of a sudden things are very, very different. That's right. Hey, Ed, do you want to tell us a little bit about, what you do one-to-one? There was a question in the chat about what kinds of clients you coach one-to-one.
So, I do three things as part of my business. My number one activity is one-on-one leadership coaching. I used to say in person, but can't say that these days. So
feels like in person. Feels like we're in the same room.
Feels like we're in person, right? We can make it in person, but it's now virtual. But I will tell you my number one goal, and Karen and I both went to IPEC together, so we've had this kind of journey of how things have evolved. And I've always told her I wish we had kept notes on what we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
Because it would be a lot different than what we talk about today. I want to work with people who have hope that they can modify how people experience them in the workplace, because regardless of how bad their reputation is or their situation is, if they have hope and belief that they can impact it, I'm in and I'm happy to help. If they don't have hope or don't want to change, I'm not the right person. I don't think you're the right person. They probably don't need a coach, but
it might not be for the right person for them at that moment, right? That could shift, but yeah, that's not the best way to deploy your skills.
So if they have hope that they can evolve and make progress, then I'm in. Happy to help and happy to work with them.
Yeah, and you also do work with teams.
I do. So I do, the three things I work on: one-on-one leadership coaching, team coaching using the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, and then I also do business strategy. So some of my clients are on the webinar tonight, but working with smaller businesses who need to pivot or work on a particular area of their business that is new to them, and either due to a geographical change, an acquisition, new products and services, whatever it might be. Through my years in human resources, in retailing, and at Iron Mountain, I also practiced curiosity, and I learned a lot about real estate and legal and marketing and finance and technology, only to a certain degree, but I know enough to kind of help them get started to move in those particular directions.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I think as we almost finish off here, it's a great time to remind people that if you search under your name or you search under the book title of Driving Your Career, you can purchase this either at your website, which is excelius.com, but much easier on Amazon. So that's another way to do it. And a great big thank you to this team of folks who have joined you tonight. Ed, would you like to finish off the evening for us?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for finding time on a beautiful Thursday evening to stay presumably indoors. I guess you could be watching from outdoors, but I really appreciate everybody's support, contributions. Again, selfishly, I will just ask that folks go to Amazon.com, and once you finish reading the book, putting in a review so we can get 75 reviews. That's our goal.
We're there. I'm feeling it. It's right here.
But that's the goal. And again, thank you so much for your continued support and support of me and the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, and I'm envisioning if we could hear everyone. I'm hearing some clapping for Ed right now. That's what's happening. So bravo.
Thank you. I'll do my queen.
There you go.
All right. Karen, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Thanks, Ed. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.